The first thing I watched fall into the ocean never hit the water. It was a 17mm combination wrench, maybe 8 inches long, dropped by accident from nearly 300 feet up. I know exactly what it was because I was the one who dropped it. My name is Evan Mercer. I'm 34, and for most of the last decade, I've made my living working in places where dropping anything is considered a serious event. Cell towers, suspension bridges, refinery stacks. For the past 3 years, offshore wind turbines. People usually imagine that job as climbing ladders inside giant white towers and changing parts with a nice view of the ocean. Sometimes it is. Other times you spend 6 hours hanging from 2 ropes outside a nacelle while Atlantic wind tries to peel your gloves off. The day I dropped that wrench was one of the easy days. That's important. There was no storm, no heavy swell, no fog, no electrical problem, no emergency shutdown, no helicopter circling overhead. Nothing that would later let me say the conditions were bad enough to confuse what I saw. It was just after 11 in the morning, clear enough that I could see the service vessel below us and a line of turbines fading toward the horizon. Luis Ortega was working about 15 feet beneath me. He'd been with our crew for almost a year, which in rope access meant he was experienced enough not to panic and knew enough to still complain about everything. "You planning on actually tightening that today?" he called. "I'm waiting for you to stop talking." That could take hours. I reached for the wrench clipped to my harness. The gate on the tool tether caught against my glove. I felt it slip. There's a very specific feeling when you drop something at height. Your stomach reacts before your brain does. I slapped my hand down instinctively, missed the wrench, and watched it tumble end over end toward the ocean. "Tool!" I shouted. Luis tucked himself closer to the tower. Nobody was directly below us. The exclusion zone around the turbine was clear except for our crew transfer vessel, which was holding well outside the drop line. I expected the wrench to disappear. 300 feet is enough distance for something that small to become nothing. Instead, I watched it all the way down. It flashed in the sunlight once, twice. Then, maybe 20 feet above the water, it slowed. Not gradually, not because I lost track of it. It simply stopped falling the way things are supposed to fall. Luis saw it too. He said, "What the hell?" The wrench dropped another few feet. Slower now. Then it hovered. There is no other word for it. It hung above the ocean for maybe 2 seconds. Then it moved again, straight down. But not like it was falling anymore. It accelerated so smoothly that my eyes followed it past the surface. Past the surface. That was the part my brain rejected. The wrench should have struck the water and vanished. Instead, I could still see it beneath the water. At first I thought sunlight was playing some kind of trick through the waves. Then I realized there were no waves, not below us. The Atlantic around the turbine had gone flat. I don't mean calm. The rest of the sea still had normal movement. Dark blue swells, white caps farther out, the service vessel lifting and settling. But directly around the base of our turbine was a circle of water perhaps 200 feet across that looked like glass. Luis tilted his helmet back. "You seeing that?" "Yeah." "How deep can you see?" I looked down again, farther than I should have been able to, much farther. The wrench was still visible. It kept descending, a bright silver speck moving through blue water that somehow wasn't getting darker. I unclipped my radio. "Resolve 2, Tower 6-7. Hold position." Dana Pike answered from the vessel. 6-7, go ahead. "Do you have anything weird on the water around the foundation?" There was a pause. "What kind of weird?" I hated how ridiculous the answer sounded before I even said it. "Visibility." Another pause, then, "Explain." Luis leaned out slightly from the tower. That was when he stopped smiling. "Evan." I looked down. The wrench was gone. Something else was there. At first I thought I was seeing the turbine's shadow. The geometry almost fit. A pale vertical line directly beneath us extending downward through impossible clarity. Then the line widened near the far end. 3 blades, a nacelle, a tower. My hands tightened around the rope. There was another wind turbine beneath the ocean, upside down. Its blades were far below us, its tower rising toward our foundation, as though the seafloor were another sky. I stared long enough that distance became difficult to judge. It could have been 500 feet below. It could have been 5,000. There were no visual cues that made sense. Then I noticed another one, off to the east, and another beyond that. A row of pale structures descending into the blue, positioned almost exactly where our turbine stood above the surface. Almost. Luis whispered, "Tell me those are reflections." "They can't be?" "I know. Tell me anyway." Dana came back over the radio. 6-7, we don't see anything unusual from here." I raised my eyes toward the vessel. From our height it looked tiny, maybe a toy sitting on dark water. "Dana, what do you see directly below our tower?" "Water? No discoloration?" "No." "No flat spot?" "Negative." Luis was still staring downward. Then he pointed. "There." I followed his finger. Far below us on the upside-down turbine, something was moving. A person, small at that distance, dark coveralls, helmet, harness. The figure walked along the underside of the nacelle as naturally as Luis and I would walk across a deck. Then it stopped, bent down, and picked something up. Even from that far away, sunlight caught the object in its hand. Silver, 8 inches long. Luis looked at me. Neither of us said anything. Below the ocean, the figure straightened and lifted my wrench toward us. Luis made a sound beside me that was almost a laugh, except there was nothing amused in it. "No," he said. The figure below remained perfectly still, one arm raised. My wrench catching light in its hand. I had spent enough years working at height to know what panic does to people. It narrows the world, makes you fixate on one thing until you forget the 10 other things that can kill you. So I forced myself to stop looking. I checked my primary rope, backup rope, chest ascender, descender, tool bag. Luis's attachment points, all normal. That little inventory calmed me enough to use the radio without sounding insane. "Resolve 2, I need you to bring the vessel closer to 6-7. Dana answered immediately. "Define closer." "Inside visual range of the foundation." "We're already visual." "I mean close enough to inspect the water." There was a silence, the kind where everybody on the shared channel stops what they're doing. Then Dana said, "Stand by." Luis looked up at me. "You going to tell her?" "Not over open radio." "Because it sounds crazy?" "Because I'd like to stay employed." He looked down again despite himself. The figure had lowered its arm. Now it was walking, not toward the tower, around the nacelle. There were details I should not have been able to see at that distance, but every time the figure passed through one of those strangely bright columns in the water, its shape sharpened. Helmet, harness, 2 ropes, a yellow tool pouch hanging from the right hip. Luis looked at his own pouch. Yellow. He stopped moving. "Evan." "Don't." "It's got my bag." "It's got a bag." "It's mine." I finally looked at him. Luis had gone pale enough that the skin around his eyes looked gray. "Same color doesn't mean anything," he swallowed. "I put black tape around the bottom because the zipper split." I looked down. The figure beneath the water turned. A black band was visible around the bottom of the yellow pouch. My radio cracked. 6-7, Resolve 2, moving in." I looked toward the vessel. The crew transfer boat turned its bow and started toward us. Dana Pike was the site supervisor for that rotation, which meant the moment she arrived, this stopped being something Luis and I could quietly decide to ignore. Part of me wanted that. A bigger part wanted the boat to turn around. The closer it got, the stranger the flat patch of water became. From above, I could see the boundary clearly. Normal ocean outside, perfectly smooth water inside. The vessel approached at low speed. Its wake traveled toward the circle, then disappeared at the edge. Not weakened. Not flattened gradually. Gone. Dana's voice came through my radio. Okay. One word. Quiet. She saw it. What do you have? I asked. Surface disturbance boundary. Can you see through it? Negative. That caught me. Nothing below? Foundation. Maybe 10 feet. Visibility's poor. Luis and I looked at each other. From where we hung, the water beneath us was clear enough to see another world. From the vessel, nothing. Dana continued. I'm reading no unusual current. No temperature differential worth mentioning. The boat crept closer. Dana, stop outside the boundary. Copy. She did. I watched the bow settle just short of the perfectly flat circle. One of the deckhands, Marcus, came out with a boat hook. I could see him leaning over the rail. What's he doing? I asked. Checking the surface. Don't put anything in it. Dana didn't answer. Marcus lowered the hook. The aluminum tip touched the water. Nothing happened. He pushed it deeper, 2 feet, 3. Then he jerked backwards so hard he almost fell. Dana shouted something away from the radio. Marcus let go. The boat hook did not sink. It shot downward, exactly like my wrench, straight through the surface without a splash. From my position, I saw it descend hundreds of feet in seconds. Then thousands. It shrank toward the upside-down structures. Luis whispered, There. A second figure had appeared below. It walked out from behind the inverted turbine tower. This one carried something long, metallic, a boat hook. Dana's voice came back sharper now. Everybody off exterior access. I'm calling a suspension. A work suspension meant turbines shut down, personnel recalled. No further climbing until site safety cleared whatever had triggered it. Normally, that would have been the end of our involvement. We would descend, board the vessel, let engineers and safety officers invent terms for what had happened. I almost believed that was what we were going to do. Then Luis said, Evan. He was staring farther east, not beneath our turbine anymore, at another inverted tower. Its blades were moving. Slowly, the turbines above us had been feathered for maintenance. None of our blades were turning, but beneath the ocean, one was, then another, then another. A sequence moving east to west. Each submerged turbine started only after the previous one reached a full rotation. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. They were approaching us. Dana, I said, shut down every turbine in the string. They are shut down. Confirm. A pause, then, confirmed. The submerged blades kept turning. The one directly beneath Tower 6-8 began to rotate. Luis said, 6-7 is next. He was right. The sequence was moving toward us. I looked at the upside-down turbine below. At the tiny figure carrying my wrench. At the second figure holding Marcus's boat hook. Both of them had stopped walking. They were looking up, waiting. Then the blades beneath our feet moved. Not fast, just enough to turn several degrees. The tower around us gave a low, metallic groan. Luis jerked his head up. That was us! I felt it through my boots, a vibration from inside the structure. The real turbine, our turbine. Another groan rolled through the tower, and this time one of the enormous blades above us moved too, maybe 6 inches. Dana shouted over the radio. 6-7, descend now! I grabbed my descender. Copy. Luis started down first. He made it maybe 10 feet, then stopped. I saw his rope pull taut beneath him. He looked down, then back up at me. Evan. What? My line. What about it? It's heavy. I leaned out. Both of Luis's ropes continued normally below him. Past his boots, past the lower platform, down toward the water, except they were supposed to terminate at our lower rigging point. They didn't. They continued through the tower's access structure. Through open air, straight into the ocean. Luis stared at them. I only brought 300 feet. I already knew what he meant. His ropes had become longer. Far longer. They extended through the flat water until I could see them descending toward the inverted turbine, and far below us the figure with the yellow pouch reached up. It wrapped both hands around Luis's rope. The line snapped tight. Luis dropped 6 inches. He screamed. I locked my descender and reached for him. Another pull came from below, harder. Luis slammed against the tower. "Cut it!" he shouted. I reached for the rescue knife on my harness, then stopped. His primary and backup lines were the only things keeping him 300 feet above the Atlantic. If I cut them, gravity would do the rest. Except I no longer knew which gravity. Below us, the figure pulled again, and Luis began moving downward, not falling, being hauled. I moved before I had time to think about it. That probably saved Luis. I kicked off the tower, swung across the gap between us, and caught the shoulder strap of his harness with my left hand. The impact knocked the air out of both of us. For 1 second we hung together against the steel. Then whatever had hold of his ropes pulled again. My arm nearly came out of its socket. "Dana!" I shouted into the radio. "We have tension on Luis's lines from below." "What does that mean?" "It means something is pulling him." There was no answer to that. I clipped a short rescue lanyard from my harness into Luis's dorsal attachment. Now he was tied to me as well as to the 2 lines disappearing toward the ocean. "Can you unload your descender?" "I'm trying." Luis fought with the device. The rope was so tight beneath him that the descender had effectively become a clamp. Another downward pull came. This one lifted me off my own stance. For a fraction of a second, my weight transferred onto Luis. And something changed. The world tilted. Not visually, physically. My stomach went weightless, the same sensation you get when an elevator drops unexpectedly. The ocean below seemed to rush closer, then farther away. I looked down. The inverted turbine was larger, a lot larger. I could make out bolts on the nacelle. The railing, the yellow bag on the figure's hip, and the figure itself. It was Luis, not something that looked vaguely like him. Luis, same helmet, same blue coveralls, same black tape around the pouch. His face was angled upward toward us. The distance should have made facial recognition impossible. I recognized him anyway. The Luis hanging beside me saw it too. Oh God. Below, the other Luis pulled on the rope. Our Luis dropped another foot. I grabbed the rescue knife. "Listen to me," I said. His eyes snapped toward mine. "I'm going to cut your primary." He shook his head immediately. "No. You're attached to me. That's one connection. And my backup. If yours changes too..." "I know." Another pull. The figure below was bringing him down hand over hand. The second figure, the one holding Marcus's boat hook, stood nearby watching. I drew the knife. On 3. Luis stared at the water. "Evan." 1. "That thing down there is me." 2. "What happens if you cut the wrong side?" I stopped. That was the question neither of us had wanted to say aloud. His rope ran from the anchor above, through his equipment, then downward where it should have ended. Except now it didn't. We had 2 directions acting on the same line. Cutting below him might release whatever was pulling. Or it might cut him away from the gravity that still belonged to us. I put the knife back. "We don't cut anything." Luis gave me a look that was half terror, half disbelief. "What's the new plan?" "I don't have one yet." Dana came over the radio. "We're positioning beneath you." "No. We can catch him if... Stay outside the flat water." "We're not leaving you up there." "Dana, the boat hook went through it." Silence. Then, "Understood." I needed another anchor. something independent of Luis's ropes. I looked up toward the exterior service rail. 20 feet above us. "Luis, can you climb?" "Against that?" "Not on your lines." I pulled a spare positioning rope from the small pack behind my harness. We carried it for rescue transfers and short redirects. Not enough for a full descent. Enough for this. I threw the weighted end upward, missed the rail. It fell back. The moment the metal weight dropped below my boots, both of us watched it. It fell normally. That mattered. I hauled it back. Second throw, the weight passed over the rail. I caught the returning end and pulled until the rope formed a loop around the steel. "New system," I said. "We go up." Luis laughed once. "You want to climb higher?" "I want you off those lines." I connected him to the spare rope, then myself. We began inching upward. Every time the thing below pulled, Luis's old ropes tightened, but now the force transferred partly into the rail above. The tower groaned. 5 feet, 8, 10. Luis was breathing too fast. "Don't look down," I said. "I'm not." He looked down. So did I. The inverted turbine had changed again. It was closer. No. That wasn't right. The entire underwater landscape was rising. The upside-down nacelle seemed to be climbing toward the surface while remaining fixed to its tower. More detail became visible every second. Rust stains. Safety decals. A red rescue container mounted near the hatch. Then I saw something that made me stop climbing. There was a number painted on the nacelle. 67. Our number. Tower 67. Luis saw it. That's us. The figure beneath us was still pulling, and suddenly I understood something I should have noticed sooner. He wasn't pulling Luis toward him. He was climbing, using our rope. The duplicate rose hand over hand from the inverted nacelle, toward the ocean surface, toward us. "Move," I said. Luis climbed. I followed. We reached the service rail. I got Luis clipped into a fixed structural anchor. "Transfer everything." He moved fast now. Primary connection, secondary. Then the last attachment to his original rope. He looked at me. "Ready?" I nodded. He released it. The moment his harness came free, both ropes snapped downward, not fell. Snapped, like cables under massive tension. They whipped past us and vanished through the lower structure. For an instant, several 100 feet of rope streamed into the ocean. Then nothing remained. The entire set had been pulled out of the tower. Luis pressed his helmet against the steel. That was all my rope. Below us, one loose end disappeared into the flat surface. Dana's voice came quietly through my radio. "Evan." "Yeah. You need to see this." I looked toward the vessel. Dana wasn't watching us anymore. She was looking behind the boat, out toward the western line of turbines. "What?" "Tower 64, she said. I turned. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then one of the distant turbines moved, not the blades, the whole structure. Tower 64 sank perhaps 3 feet into the ocean, then stopped. "Did you see that?" Dana asked. "Yes." Another turbine farther west dropped, slowly, almost gracefully. Its foundation disappeared beneath the surface by several feet. Then another. They were descending one at a time, in sequence, toward us. Luis whispered, "They're going down." I looked through the clear water beneath 6-7. The inverted towers below were rising at exactly the same rate, one world lowering, the other coming up. And between them, the distance was closing. Dana said, 6-7, we're initiating emergency extraction. Get inside the nacelle and prepare for transfer." I looked above us, then below. There was no longer any question about whether we should leave. The only question was whether leaving the turbine would matter, because in the clear water beneath us, the duplicate Luis had reached the top of his inverted tower. He stood directly below the surface, upside down from our perspective. His boots planted on a platform that should have been thousands of feet beneath us. Only a thin sheet of Atlantic water separated him from daylight. Then he lifted his head, and this time I could clearly see his face. He was looking at Luis, but he was smiling at me. The smile disappeared the moment I met its eyes. That was worse. For maybe 2 seconds it had looked like a person trying to get a reaction out of me. Then its face went completely neutral. Luis whispered, "Why is it looking at you?" "I don't know." "You dropped the wrench." I knew what he meant. My wrench had been the first thing we saw cross over. Marcus's boat hook came after, Luis's ropes after that. Every object that entered that flat patch had appeared somewhere below. Maybe the figure wasn't Luis because it had chosen him. Maybe it was Luis because his equipment had given that place enough information to build him. And maybe it was looking at me because the first thing I had sent down belonged to me. Dana broke in over the radio. "Both of you inside, now!" We climbed. The exterior hatch into the nacelle was less than 20 feet above us, but by then the tower had begun vibrating hard enough that every handhold felt alive. Luis reached the hatch first. He opened it and pulled himself inside. I followed and dogged it shut behind us. Inside the nacelle, everything sounded worse. Gearbox housing, yaw drive, brake assemblies. All the machinery that normally sat quiet during shutdown was producing low, irregular knocks, not running, reacting. The turbine was under stress. Luis dropped onto the grated floor. "What's the transfer plan?" Dana answered before I could. "Helicopter unavailable. Weather window is still clear, but nearest aircraft is over 40 minutes out." "We don't have 40 minutes." "I know." "What about climbing down internally?" "Foundation crew says waterline is changing." "How?" "Your tower draft is increasing." I looked at Luis. The turbine was sinking. Dana continued, "We're bringing Resolve 2 to the access platform. You'll descend internal ladder, transfer when we make contact." I went to the small nacelle window. The sea should have been far below. It wasn't. The service platform at the base looked closer than before. Too close. "Dana, how much have we dropped?" 11 feet from baseline, Luis swore quietly. "What about 6.6? 7 feet. 6.5? 4. The sequence, the farther west, the earlier they had started dropping. It was coming toward us exactly as the inverted turbines rose. I looked east. 6.8 had not moved yet. Then I noticed something else. There was no flat circle around 6.8. Only ours. The phenomenon had followed the sequence, but the clear water had settled on our turbine, on us. "Dana, abort the vessel approach. We're already moving. Stop." "Evan." "The flat water is attached to 6.7 now. If you enter it, we don't know what happens to the boat. We can't leave you there." "You can if bringing 12 more people into this makes it worse." Dana didn't answer immediately. That told me she knew I was right. Luis stood. "So what? We wait to go underwater?" I looked around the nacelle. There had to be another way. Wind turbines are designed around redundancy. Mechanical brakes, electrical isolation, emergency yaw, manual blade positioning. If one system fails, another is supposed to give you options. That thinking had kept me alive before. Years earlier, on a refinery stack in Louisiana, a platform bracket had failed under another technician. I'd frozen for maybe 3 seconds while everyone else shouted. 3 seconds. He survived, but badly injured. After that, I became the guy who never improvised unless I understood the load path first. People called it cautious. Some called it cowardly. Luis had never called it either. Now he was watching me, waiting. "What do we control locally?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "The machine. With grid command unavailable. What can we still move?" "Yaw backup." "Blades?" "Hydraulic release if accumulator pressure holds." I went to the maintenance panel. Luis followed. The turbine was shut down with all 3 blades feathered to minimize wind load. Below us, the inverted blades had rotated. That rotation had been mirrored, at least slightly, by ours. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet." "That's comforting." I checked hydraulic pressure, still usable. Yaw control was in service mode. The nacelle could rotate relative to the tower. Slowly, a few degrees at a time. I looked through the window again. Below the surface, the inverted 6-7 was so close now that I could see its entire upper platform clearly. 2 figures stood on it. Duplicate Luis and another man. Marcus, same orange flotation jacket he was wearing on Resolve 2, same shaved head, same dark beard. The real Marcus was standing on the vessel deck less than 300 feet away. Then something silver flashed beside the duplicate Luis. My wrench. He held it out toward duplicate Marcus. Marcus took it. The moment his hand closed around it, a metallic clang sounded inside our nacelle. Something struck the floor behind me. Luis spun around. My 17mm wrench lay on the grated walkway. For a second, neither of us moved. I picked it up. It was wet, not damp. Dripping seawater. Luis stared at it. "It came back?" I turned it over. There was a fresh mark on the handle. A shallow scrape through the chrome. I knew that wrench. I had used it for almost 4 years. That mark had not been there before. Luis said, "Maybe that's good." "No?" "Why?" "Because nothing came back until now." Below us, duplicate Marcus raised the boat hook. A second later, something slammed against the outside of the nacelle. Metal on fiberglass. We both ducked. Another impact, then another, from beneath us. Impossible because the nacelle was nearly 300 feet above the sea. Luis backed away from the wall. "They're sending things up." I looked down at the wrench in my hand. No, not up, across. The distance between the 2 structures had collapsed enough that objects could cross in both directions. And if tools could cross, I looked through the window. Duplicate Luis was no longer on the lower platform. Only Marcus remained. "Where did he go?" Luis came beside me. We searched the inverted nacelle. Nothing. Then the access hatch beneath our feet rattled. Once. Luis froze. The hatch led into the tower. There was nobody else on 6-7. It rattled again. Someone was climbing the internal ladder toward us. Dana's voice came over the radio. "Evan, we've got a problem." I kept my eyes on the hatch. "So do we." 6-7 just changed orientation. "What?" "Your nacelle yawed 6 degrees. I looked at the control panel. It had, without command. Then another degree. The entire nacelle turned slowly over the tower. Outside, the blades shifted relative to the wind. The structure groaned, and suddenly I understood why the duplicate turbine below had been rotating first. It hadn't been copying us. It had been demonstrating what came next. I grabbed the manual yaw control. "Luis, get your rescue kit." "What are you doing?" "Moving the nacelle." "It's already moving." "I know." I forced the control into manual override. The motor resisted, then engaged. The nacelle stopped. The hatch below us rattled violently. I turned the yaw command in the opposite direction. 5 degrees, 10, 15. The turbine shuddered. As the rotor shifted across the wind, below the surface, the inverted nacelle began turning too, not mirroring us, fighting us. For the first time since the wrench fell, the 2 structures were trying to occupy different positions. The flat water rippled. A real wave crossed it. Luis saw it. "You did something!" The hatch slammed upward once. The locking dogs held. I kept rotating. 20 degrees, 25. The turbine groaned like a ship under strain. Dana shouted over the radio, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your draft just decreased 2 feet." Luis looked at me. The hatch slammed again, hard enough to bend one hinge. I said, We don't need to beat whatever's down there. Another wave crossed the flat circle. 3 feet of tower rose back out of the sea. We just need to make our turbine stop agreeing with it. I kept the yaw motor running. 30 degrees, 35. The vibration coming through the nacelle changed pitch. What had been a deep mechanical groan became a rapid tremor under my boots, like the whole structure was trying to shake itself loose from something. Dana's voice came through the radio. 6-7 is rising, another 3 feet. Luis was watching the hatch. It jumped again. The bent hinge peeled farther from the frame. Evan. I see it. What happens when that opens? I'd rather not find out. The yaw motor alarmed. Maximum service load warning. I could keep forcing it, but if the drive tripped, we would lose the only thing that seemed to be separating us from the structure below. I looked at the blade control panel. Luis, accumulator pressure? He checked. Enough for 1 pitch cycle. Maybe. That was all we needed. Maybe. The rotor above us was still feathered, 3 enormous blades presenting as little surface as possible to the wind. The inverted turbine had been matching our geometry. If yawing made the 2 structures disagree, changing blade pitch might make that disagreement impossible to maintain. Unfeather 1 blade. Luis looked at me. Just 1? 1. That'll unbalance the rotor. Exactly. He hesitated for half a second, then reached for the hydraulic manual release. Which blade? Blade 2. He opened the circuit. Somewhere outside, hydraulic pressure moved through the hub. The nacelle shook. Then blade 2 rotated. Slowly at first, its broad face turned into the wind. The load hit immediately. The entire turbine leaned, not enough to see, enough to feel. The hatch beneath us slammed upward. This time the damaged hinge broke. One side rose several inches. A hand came through, gloved, blue sleeve. Luis stumbled backward. The hand felt around the edge of the hatch, searching for leverage. Same gloves Luis wore, same reflective strip around the wrist. Then another hand appeared. I could hear breathing below us, not distorted, not monstrous, just a man climbing hard. Luis stared at his own hands, then at the ones coming through the hatch. No, the duplicate pulled. The hatch opened another foot. I saw the top of a helmet, Luis's helmet. Same white shell, same green inspection sticker. Same black scrape over the left ear, where he'd hit a tower flange 2 months earlier. I moved to the hatch. Luis caught my arm. What are you doing? Buying the blade time. You don't know what that thing is. No. The duplicate pushed its head through. Its face was Luis's, but something was wrong with the expression. Not distorted, incomplete. It looked like someone had learned what strange should look like by watching Luis climb and had reproduced the visible pieces without understanding what they were for. Teeth clenched, forehead tight, eyes perfectly calm. It looked at me, then it spoke. Evan, help me. Luis made a sound behind me. The duplicate used his voice exactly. Same accent, same breathless edge. Help me up. I grabbed the hatch handle. The duplicate reached for my wrist. I slammed the hatch down. Its fingers disappeared an instant before the metal struck. The whole nacelle lurched. Luis shouted, Blade! I looked at the panel. Blade 2 had reached almost full working pitch. Wind pressure was climbing rapidly. Outside, the rotor began to move, just a fraction. Then another. The brake held. The structure groaned. Below us came a sound like steel tearing underwater. Dana shouted over the radio, The surface is breaking up! I ran to the window. The perfect circle was gone. Waves were crossing beneath 6-7 now. Real waves, wind-driven, white at the edges. Through them I could still see the inverted turbine, but it was fading. Not sinking, losing definition, like an image being erased from the deepest part first. The lower blades disappeared. Then the tower, the nacelle, remained. For another few seconds I could see figures standing on it. Marcus, Luis, and several others. More than we had sent anything down for. 5, maybe 6. People in different colored work gear. One wore an older-style orange survival suit I had never seen on our project. Another appeared to be wearing a hard hat instead of a climbing helmet. They all looked upward. None moved. Then the ocean darkened to its normal Atlantic blue. The nacelle vanished. The hatch beneath us stopped moving. The tension left the tower so suddenly I nearly lost my balance. Dana came over the radio. 6-7 is back at normal draft. Neither Luis nor I answered. Evan? I'm here. What happened? I looked at the wrench still lying on the floor. I don't know. That was the first completely accurate answer I had given all day. We stayed in the nacelle until the vessel could safely approach. Once the sea returned to normal, the transfer was almost insultingly ordinary. Internal ladder, transition platform, boat landing. 2 deckhands helping us across. Dana met us inside the cabin. Nobody talked about duplicate people. Nobody talked about an upside-down wind farm, not immediately. We talked about things we could measure. Unexpected yaw movement, abnormal foundation draft, hydraulic activation, lost rope system, lost boat hook, tool drop. That language made everyone feel better. Until Marcus saw my wrench. He picked it up from the table. This came back? Yeah? He turned it over, then stopped. What? He pointed at the new scrape on the handle. There were letters inside it. Not scratched randomly, stamped, very small. I had to hold the wrench under the cabin light to read them. T-71. Luis leaned closer. Tower 71? There is no Tower 71, Dana said. She was right. Our installed line ended at 69. 2 more foundations were scheduled for the next construction phase, but nobody on our maintenance rotation had their final numbering. Dana opened the project drawing on her laptop. She stared at it for a long time, then closed the screen. What? I asked. Nothing. Dana. She looked at me. The proposed eastern extension ends at 71. Nobody said anything after that. The investigation lasted almost 3 weeks. Officially, the event became a combination of localized current behavior, equipment malfunction, and human perceptual error under unusual reflective conditions. Luis refused to participate after the second interview. Marcus stopped asking for his boat hook. I went back to work, not because I believed the explanation. Because offshore work pays well and fear does not cancel a mortgage. 3 months later, I returned to the same field. Construction had progressed east. Tower 70 was already standing. Tower 71 had been installed the previous week. I saw it from the crew vessel just after sunrise. White tower, 3 blades, fresh paint. Nothing unusual. Then the vessel changed course, and I saw its position relative to 6-7. My stomach tightened. I had seen that arrangement before, from 300 feet above the Atlantic, looking down. Tower 71 stood exactly where the last visible turbine in the underwater farm had already been. Luis had asked me once whether I thought we had seen another version of our wind farm. For a long time, I thought that was the worst possibility. I don't anymore, because another version would mean there were 2. What I saw beneath the ocean looked older than ours, more complete, and when my wrench came back, it carried the number of a turbine that didn't exist yet. So now, whenever another foundation goes into the Atlantic, I find myself wondering whether we're really building outward, or whether we're just catching up. I first noticed the horizon was missing because I was trying to photograph a whale that wasn't there anymore. That sounds more dramatic than it was. Most wildlife photography is waiting for something to happen, then realizing it happened half a second before you were ready. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 27 that summer, working freelance and taking almost any assignment that put me somewhere interesting enough to justify the uncertainty of freelance income. That was how I ended up aboard the Morrow, a 46-foot research charter operating several hundred miles west of the California coast. There were 8 of us on board. Dr. Helen Cho ran the survey. She specialized in cetacean behavior and had the particular ability to sound calm while telling everyone else they were doing something wrong. Our captain was Martin Vale, 50-something, sunburned year-round. With 30 years offshore and an almost religious distrust of anything electronic that couldn't be hit with a wrench. There were 2 graduate researchers, Nadia and Ben. A deckhand named Owen, a hydrophone technician named Caleb, and me. My job was simple: photograph dorsal fins, scars, pigmentation patterns, and anything else useful for identifying individual whales. It had been a slow morning. By early afternoon, the Pacific looked polished. Not perfectly flat, but close. Long, lazy swells passed under us without breaking, and the light had that washed-out quality open water gets when the sun is high enough to remove shadows. We'd spotted a small group of fin whales around noon. Then they vanished. I was standing near the starboard rail with my camera raised, waiting for another surface. One appeared perhaps 300 yards out. Dark back, brief spray. I tracked it through the viewfinder. Autofocus caught. I fired 6 frames. The whale disappeared. Routine. I checked the images. The first 5 were useless. Water, spray, 1 partial dorsal. The 6th was different. Not because of the whale, because the horizon wasn't there. I lowered the camera. The horizon was obvious in front of me. A thin division between pale blue sky and darker blue water. I raised the camera again, looked through the viewfinder. Still there. I opened the photo. Gone. In the image, sea and sky blended into one continuous blue field. No dividing line. I assumed exposure, then lens flare, then the circular polarizer. I rotated the filter and took another shot. Same result. I removed it entirely. Third shot. No horizon. Nadia noticed me staring at the screen. What did you get? Nothing useful. She leaned closer. That's weird. You see it? The whale? The horizon. She took the camera, zoomed in, then out. It's just haze. That much haze would flatten everything. Compression? Raw file. She shrugged and handed the camera back. Camera problem. That was the sensible answer. So I changed lenses. My second body had a short telephoto mounted. I photographed the same section of ocean. The horizon appeared. I actually laughed. There. Nadia looked, then frowned. What? I checked the image. The line was there, but faint. I took another, fainter, another, gone. This time Nadia didn't say camera problem. She looked toward the western horizon. Nothing seemed wrong. Take 1 south. I did. Normal, north, normal. East, back toward the wake. Normal. West again. No horizon. Nadia walked away without saying anything. She returned with Helen. That annoyed me slightly because I hadn't decided yet whether there was anything worth reporting. Helen held out her hand. Show me. I gave her the camera. She scrolled through the sequence. How long between these? Maybe 4 minutes. She looked west. What bearing? I checked the compass display on my camera. 273. Helen called toward the wheelhouse. Martin, hold course. The captain leaned out. Wasn't planning to turn. Helen ignored him. She took out her phone and photographed the western horizon, then looked at the result. Her expression changed. Not fear, concentration. She photographed north, east, south, west again. Claire. Yeah? Come here. The western horizon was gone from her phone, too. That was when Martin finally became interested. He came down from the wheelhouse carrying binoculars. What are we looking at? Helen pointed west. The image boundary disappears. Martin stared at her. The what? The horizon? I can see the horizon. So can we. He looked through the binoculars. Still there. Take a picture. I don't take pictures of water. Martin? He grumbled, pulled out his phone and did it. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he wiped the camera lens on his shirt and tried again. Same result. What are your cameras doing? He asked. All of them? I said, apparently. Martin looked toward the western sky. Probably atmospheric. Helen nodded. Possibly. That word bothered me more than if she had said she didn't know. Scientists use possibly when they're keeping several unpleasant options alive. We continued west. Another 20 minutes passed. Nobody said much about the photographs. Then Owen, the deckhand, called from the stern. Hey, Martin, the captain answered from above. What? You seeing this? We all turned. Owen was pointing west. At first I didn't understand. Then I realized the problem wasn't in the cameras anymore. The horizon itself had disappeared. There was no fog bank, no cloud layer, no visible transition. The ocean simply extended away from us until, somewhere in the distance, blue water became blue sky without any line marking where one ended and the other began. Nadia whispered, That's not possible. Martin immediately checked the compass, then GPS, then radar, all ordinary. We're not inside anything, he said. Helen stared west. Slow us down. Martin did. The engines dropped. Our wake shortened. I raised my camera. The photographs now matched what my eyes could see. No horizon. Caleb came up from below deck. What happened? Nobody answered him. He followed our gaze. Oh? That one syllable was all he managed. Then something surfaced far ahead. Not a whale, a white object. Small, round. Owen grabbed binoculars. Looks like a float. Research buoy? Ben asked. Too small. It drifted perhaps 200 yards off the bow. Martin changed course slightly to avoid it. As we passed, Owen hooked it with a pole. It was a faded orange life ring. No vessel name, no markings. Just old foam covered in salt stains. Owen dropped it on deck. Probably fell off a fishing boat. Martin nodded. That's all. The explanation might have held, except Nadia pointed behind us. The life ring was still floating in the water. 200 yards astern. Owen looked down at the identical ring at his feet, then back at the one behind us. Nobody spoke. I picked up my camera and photographed both. The ring on our deck appeared normally. The one behind us appeared normally. And between them, across the entire western half of the image, there was still no horizon. Martin stared at the duplicate ring for a long time, then said very quietly, We're turning around. He brought the Morrow into a slow eastern arc. As our bow swung away from the missing horizon, the compass behaved normally. The GPS track curved exactly as expected. The sun remained fixed overhead. Everything told us we were turning. Except the vanished horizon moved with us. By the time we pointed east, it was directly ahead again. Martin killed the engines, not reduced throttle. Killed them. The sudden quiet made the ocean seem enormous. For a few seconds, all I could hear was water tapping against the hull and the faint metallic rattle of something loose near the stern. The missing horizon stayed directly ahead of us. Martin checked the compass again. Heading 088. Helen looked over the stern. And behind us? Normal horizon. Perfectly normal. A dark blue line dividing ocean from sky. Martin turned the wheel even though the engines were off. Nothing happened, obviously. He swore under his breath. Caleb said, Maybe it isn't directional. Martin looked at him. It moved when we turned. No, maybe we moved relative to it. That's the same thing. Helen shook her head. Not necessarily. Nobody liked that answer. Ben brought up the navigation display. Our GPS showed a clean curved track where Martin had turned the vessel. No jumps, no impossible speed, no lost signal. According to every instrument on board, we had made almost a complete reversal. According to the horizon, we hadn't changed our relationship to the strange part of the ocean at all. Owen was still staring at the two life rings, one on deck, one floating behind us. He nudged the one at his feet with his boot. "What happens if I throw this one back?" "Don't," Helen said. He looked at her. "Why?" "I don't know." "That's not a reason." "It's the only one I have." Martin restarted one engine and kept us almost dead in the water. Then he pointed toward the stern. "Watch the wake." There wasn't much of one at that speed. Just a narrow disturbance trailing behind us. Normal water, normal horizon. He increased throttle slightly. The Morrow began moving. Ahead of us, no horizon. Behind us, a thin white wake stretched eastward. After maybe 50 yards, something happened to it. The wake narrowed, then narrowed again. It didn't fade naturally. It looked pinched, like someone was pulling the far end of it into a point. Helen saw it too. "Stop!" Martin did. We all stared behind us. The wake should have continued dispersing across the surface. Instead, the farthest section remained unnaturally sharp, a white line stretching toward the eastern horizon. Nadia said, "Does that look longer than it should?" Nobody answered. I lifted my camera, photographed the stern, then zoomed in on the image. The wake reached almost all of the way to the visible horizon. That made no sense. We had moved maybe 100 yards since restarting. I checked another frame. Same thing. Helen looked over my shoulder. "Can you estimate scale?" "Not from this." Ben said, "Radar reflector." Martin glanced at him. "What?" "Throw something overboard with a reflector. Track the distance." Owen pointed at the duplicate life ring in the water. "We already have something." Martin checked radar. The ring was too small to return clearly. Ben went below and came back with a compact emergency radar reflector and a length of thin utility line. Helen stopped him before he tied it to anything. "No fixed line yet." Ben frowned. "Why?" "Because if distance is behaving strangely, I don't want that difference connected to the boat." Again, nobody argued with her. They attached the reflector to a spare float. Martin positioned the boat so the normal horizon was behind us and the missing one ahead. Then Owen tossed the float over the stern. It bobbed 10 feet away. Radar picked it up, 11 yards. Martin eased forward. 20 yards, 30, 50. The radar distance increased normally. Then, around 60 yards, it stopped. Not the float. The measurement. We continued moving. 61 yards, 62, 62, 62. Martin reduced speed. The float was visibly farther away, maybe 100 yards now. Radar still showed 62. Ben said, "Radar fault." Caleb checked another display. "No." "What?" "The return timing is stable." Martin looked at him. "That means what?" "It means the radar pulse is taking the same amount of time to reach it and come back." We all looked at the float. It was getting smaller, yet according to the signal, the distance between us wasn't increasing. Helen said, "Claire, photograph it." I did. Through the telephoto lens, the float looked farther away than it should have. I switched to a longer focal length, focused, shot again. Every image showed the same orange float. But its apparent size changed faster than physical distance could explain. Martin brought us to idle. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then Owen said, "I want to try the line." Helen turned sharply. "No." "A controlled line." "No. If we don't understand what distance is doing, we're guessing." "You volunteering?" "Yes." Martin looked at him. "Owen?" "I'll use the dinghy." That changed the room. The Morrow carried a small, rigid inflatable for nearshore sampling and emergency transfer. It was rated for 4 people. Small outboard, simple controls, reliable. Helen said, "Absolutely not." Owen crossed his arms. "Then we sit here until dark? Here until dark?" Nobody answered. That was the problem. Sunset was less than 4 hours away. Offshore darkness wasn't automatically dangerous, but navigating something we didn't understand at night would be worse. Martin finally said, "You don't go alone." Ben volunteered. Helen refused that too. They argued for 5 minutes. In the end, Owen went alone because adding another person only doubled the risk. We attached a 1,000-foot floating line to the dinghy. Not because we expected him to travel that far, because we wanted a physical measurement. Martin gave him strict instructions. 50 yards out, stop, return, no exceptions. Owen lowered into the dinghy, started the outboard. Everything looked ordinary. He moved away from the Morrow toward the missing horizon. 10 yards, 20, 30. The line paid out smoothly. At 50 yards, Martin raised his hand. "Stop there." Owen throttled down. The dinghy floated maybe 50 yards away. We could see him clearly. He lifted both arms. 50! His voice carried easily across the water. Martin checked the line markings. 52. Normal. Helen exhaled. For one hopeful second, I thought we had found something stable. Then Owen looked down at his GPS. His face changed. He raised the handheld radio. "Martin? Go ahead." "My GPS says 0.4 miles. Nobody moved. Martin looked at the line. 52 yards. He looked at Owen. Owen appeared 50 yards away. "Repeat." 0.4 miles from you. That's over 700 yards. "I know. B." Helen grabbed the spare GPS aboard the Morrow. Our unit placed the dinghy 53 yards away. 2 GPS receivers, 2 different distances, same satellites. Owen said, "Want me back?" "Yes," Martin said immediately. Owen turned the dinghy around. The moment he did, the line went taut. Not violently, just suddenly. Martin stared at it. "Why is there tension?" Owen throttled toward us. The dinghy moved. The line did not slacken. 50 yards of visible water separated us, yet the rope began feeding off our deck. Another 20 feet. Then 50. Then 100. Owen was coming closer. The line was getting longer. Helen whispered, "Oh my God." 200 feet paid out. 300. The dinghy now looked maybe 30 yards away. Owen shouted over the radio, "I'm not getting closer!" From our perspective, he clearly was. Martin yelled, "What do you see? You're still half a mile away." The rope kept running. 400 feet, 5, 6. I watched Owen's dinghy grow larger with every second. To us, he was approaching. To him, we weren't. Then I understood why the horizon had disappeared. It wasn't hiding anything. There was simply more ocean between us and whatever direction we tried to reach than there had been a moment before. And somehow, both distances were true. Martin killed the dinghy experiment before the rope could run all the way out. "Owen, stop your engine!" "What?" "Stop the engine." "I'm trying to get back." "You're making it worse." A second passed, then the little outboard went quiet. The rope stopped feeding. We had paid out almost 800 feet. The dinghy looked 20 yards away. Owen's GPS still showed more than half a mile. Martin stared at the line snaking across the water. "Don't move." "That's easy for you to say." Helen crouched beside the stern cleat. "Do not pull the rope." Nobody touched it. The line lay under light tension, connecting 2 positions that apparently disagreed about how far apart they were. I raised my camera. Owen filled most of the frame now. His face was visible. He looked furious, more than frightened. That was how Owen handled fear. He got angry at the thing causing it. Claire, Helen said, take one straight down the line. I focused along the rope. The first 100 feet looked normal. Then perspective became wrong. The line narrowed faster than it should have. Near Owen's dinghy, it seemed impossibly thin, as though part of the rope existed much farther away than the boat attached to it. I took several images. Helen studied them. Can you see a discontinuity? No. Anything? Only perspective that doesn't agree with itself. Martin rubbed both hands over his face. Good, great, we've got haunted geometry. Nobody laughed. Caleb came out carrying the hydrophone monitor. I've got something. Martin looked at him. Please don't. I lowered the hydrophone 10 minutes ago. So? The boat noise is wrong. Helen stood. How wrong? Caleb set the monitor on the bench and plugged in headphones, then handed them to her. She listened. Her expression tightened. Let me hear. I put them on. At first, I heard what I expected. Water movement, hull creaks, a distant mechanical hum. Then I heard our engine. Except our engine was barely running. The sound in the headphones was louder, farther away, and delayed. I pulled one side off. What am I listening to? Caleb pointed at the display. Our own prop noise. How far? That's the problem. He tapped a waveform. The return pattern suggests multiple path lengths. Martin frowned. Echoes? Maybe. From what? Caleb shook his head. No seafloor return at those timings. No nearby vessel. No thermal layer strong enough. He replayed the signal. Our engine hum arrived once. Then again, faintly. Then a third time. Each copy was slightly more delayed. Helen said, like the sound is traveling through different distances? Caleb nodded. That was when Owen's voice came over the handheld radio. Guys. Martin turned toward the dinghy. What? Do you see me? Yes. Clearly? Yes. Owen slowly raised one arm. Which arm? Martin stared at him. You're right. Owen lowered it. From 20 yards away, I saw his mouth move before the radio carried his next words. I raised my left. Nobody said anything. Owen looked down at himself, then at us. He raised the other arm. To me, it was his left. Owen, I said into the radio, what are you raising now? My right. Nadia stepped backward. No. Helen said, Claire, camera. I was already shooting. Through the lens, Owen raised his right arm. When I lowered the camera, he appeared to be raising his left. I checked the photograph. Right. I lowered it again. Left. The image and my eyes disagreed. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to panic. Not because I thought Owen was in immediate danger. Because the thing changing wasn't the water anymore. It was our ability to agree on where a person was. Martin grabbed the radio. Owen, do not move the dinghy. We're coming to you. Helen turned. How? Slowly. You don't know what direction toward him means anymore. I'm not leaving him out there. And if moving increases the separation? Martin looked at her. Then what do you suggest? Helen didn't answer. Owen did. Pull the line. Everyone looked at the rope. Helen said, No. If I can't drive back, pull me. We don't know what tension means. It means I'm tied to your boat. Not necessarily. Owen stared across the water at us. From our perspective, he was close enough to throw something to. From his, we were more than half a mile away. He held up the radio. I am not sitting out here until dark. Martin made the decision. Manual retrieval, slow. Helen closed her eyes for a second, then nodded. 4 of us took the rope. Martin, Ben, Nadia, me. We pulled. Nothing happened. The line came in easily. 10 feet. 20, 30. Owen's dinghy didn't move. Martin pulled faster. More rope came aboard. Still nothing. Stop! We stopped. The rope remained taut. Martin looked at the hundreds of feet piled on deck, then at the short, visible stretch still connecting us to Owen. That can't be right. Ben said, "We've already recovered more line than the distance between us." Nobody needed that explained. Martin grabbed another section, pulled. More rope arrived. Owen stayed exactly where he was. We kept going. 100 feet. 2, 3. Eventually, the deck looked like someone had emptied half a rope locker across it. Owen still floated 20 yards away. Then the end came aboard. The end. Martin held it in both hands. The knot was intact. The stainless clip was still closed, but it was no longer attached to the dinghy. Owen's end of the rope was still visibly attached. We could see it running from his bow directly to our stern. Martin looked at the loose clip in his hand, then at the line between us, 2 versions of the same rope, one recovered, one still spanning the water. Helen whispered, "We need to stop interacting with it." Owen's voice snapped over the radio. "With what?" "The distance." "That's not an answer." "It might be." She went to the stern and looked at our wake. What remained of it stretched toward the normal horizon behind us. She stared for several seconds, then said, "Martin, when did the missing horizon first appear?" I answered, "While we were heading west?" "Right, and after we turned east?" "It moved ahead of us." "No," Helen pointed behind us. "The normal horizon stayed behind us." Martin frowned. "That's the same observation." "No, we're treating the anomaly like a place in front of the vessel." She looked at the disappearing line ahead. "What if it isn't a place?" Caleb said. "Then what is it?" Helen turned toward the long white wake. "A consequence." Nobody spoke. She pointed to the wake again. "Every direction we actively try to reach becomes the bad direction. Every time we choose a destination and move toward it, distance starts behaving incorrectly." Martin shook his head. "We turned around and immediately tried to get back to land." "Of course we did." "Exactly." I understood before he did. "You think intention matters?" "No." Helen looked at me. "I think movement does." She pointed toward the one geometrically stable thing we had created. "Our wake." Martin stared behind us. "You want me to reverse?" "I want you to follow the path we already successfully traveled." "That's not navigation." "No." Helen looked toward Owen. "It's retreat." Owen came over the radio. "And me?" Silence. From our perspective, his dinghy remained close. From his perspective, we were far away. Martin looked at the severed rope end in his hands. "We get him first." Helen said, "How?" Martin looked around the deck. Then his eyes settled on me. "Claire." I already hated the way he said my name. "What?" "Your camera agrees with Owen's orientation when our eyes don't." "Sometimes." "It may be showing his side of the distance." I looked through the viewfinder. Owen appeared farther away than he did with my naked eyes. Not half a mile, but farther. Martin pointed to the wheelhouse. "You guide me." Helen immediately objected. "You're going toward him." "No." Martin looked at the long wake behind us. "We're going backward." He put the engine in reverse, slowly. The Morrow began backing along its own wake. I kept my camera trained on Owen. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then, through the viewfinder, the dinghy grew larger. With my naked eyes, it became smaller. "Keep going," I said. Martin increased reverse thrust. Owen's GPS distance started falling. 0.5 miles, 0.4, 0.3. Yet to everyone watching without a camera, the dinghy appeared to be drifting away. Nadia covered her mouth. Claire? Still coming closer. Point 2. The photograph was right. Our eyes were wrong. Martin followed the wake. Owen's distance continued collapsing. Then, all at once, every perspective agreed. The dinghy snapped visually from far away to 10 yards off our stern. Owen shouted. Martin stopped the engines. We hauled him aboard. For almost a minute, nobody spoke. Owen sat on the deck, pale and shaking, staring at the duplicate rope that still seemed to run from his empty dinghy toward the water ahead. Then he looked over the stern, at our wake, at the normal horizon beyond it. "Don't turn around," he said. Martin nodded. This time nobody argued. We secured the dinghy, left the impossible line floating where it was, and began backing the Morrow through open ocean, following the only distance we knew had already existed. Backing a 46-foot research vessel across open ocean is not something anyone enjoys doing. Martin especially hated it. Every 30 seconds he checked over one shoulder and then the other, even though the direction we were moving was technically the safest part of the sea. The engines pushed us east in reverse. Our bow remained pointed toward the missing horizon. Our stern followed the white line of wake we had already made. For the first 10 minutes, nothing changed. The bad horizon stayed ahead. The normal one stayed behind. Owen sat on the aft bench wrapped in a jacket even though the air was warm. He kept looking at his hands as if checking that they still belonged to him. Helen stood beside me with a notebook she had stopped writing in. That alone told me how unsettled she was. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "That we need measurements." "You just stopped taking them." She looked at the notebook. "I'm trying not to turn this into another destination." I understood what she meant. Every time we picked something ahead of us and tried to close the distance, space had misbehaved, the float, Owen, land, even the horizon. So instead of asking where we were going, Helen had started asking what remained consistent. Our wake, the boat itself, time. At least, we hoped time. Caleb checked his watch against mine, same minute. Nadia checked hers, same. Ben started a stopwatch. 5 minutes later, all four matched within a second. "That's something," he said. Nobody sounded relieved, but Martin called from the wheelhouse. "GPS speed says 4 knots. Helen looked over the stern. "Log?" 3.8. "Engine?" "Consistent." "Distance traveled?" Martin didn't answer. That was the one number nobody wanted to calculate. Our GPS track showed us moving east. But the line behind us, the path we had physically traveled before the anomaly, seemed much longer than our current coordinates could justify. After 20 minutes, the western horizon changed. A line appeared, very faint. At first I thought I imagined it. Then Nadia saw it. There. Everyone turned toward the bow. A thin, dark seam had formed where sea met sky. Martin immediately reached for the throttles. Helen shouted, "Don't!" He froze. "We're almost out." "Maybe." "What do you mean, maybe?" "Don't turn success into a target." Martin stared at her, then slowly took his hand away. We kept backing. The line ahead sharpened. More of the horizon returned from south to north. Not smoothly, in sections, like pieces of the world being redrawn. When the full western horizon finally came back, nobody cheered. We had learned too much for that. Martin kept us in reverse for another 5 minutes. Only then did Helen say, "Stop. Engines to neutral." The Morrow drifted. For the first time in hours, we had a complete horizon in every direction. I photographed north, south, east, west, all normal. Then I checked the images. Every horizon was visible. Owen laughed. It came out too loudly. "Okay, great, we're done. Turn us around and go home." Martin looked at Helen. She didn't answer. He looked at me. "Camera?" "Normal." Caleb checked radar. "Normal." Ben checked GPS. Normal. Martin exhaled through his nose. Fine. He brought the engines up, then hesitated. Heading? Nobody wanted to say east. It had become ridiculous. We all knew California was east. We all wanted to go east. But saying it felt like feeding something a command. Helen finally said, "Follow the track we already made." Martin frowned. That track runs west. The stable part runs behind us. So we keep backing? For now, Owen said. You cannot reverse across the Pacific. Martin gave him a look. I'm aware. Helen pointed at the chart plotter. Backtrack until we reach the point where Claire took the first bad photograph. That was not a destination in the same sense. It was a known location behind us, a place we had already occupied safely. Martin accepted that. We continued east in reverse, slowly, awkwardly. Another 40 minutes passed. Nothing strange happened. Then my camera clock showed 3:17. I remembered the first bad frame had been taken at 1:42. Using our recorded speed and the GPS track, we should have crossed the anomaly's starting point 20 minutes earlier. But the chart plotter said we were still 7 nautical miles away. Martin noticed too. That's impossible. Helen leaned over the display. Keep going. 5 minutes later, 6 miles, then 5. The numbers were behaving again, just stretched, as though the ocean were reluctantly giving back distance it had created. At 3 miles, Caleb's hydrophone changed. He pulled one headphone cup away. What? The echoes are gone. At 2 miles, Owen's handheld GPS agreed with the vessel system. At 1 mile, the duplicate life ring slid past our starboard side. The one we had originally pulled aboard was still tied to the aft rail. Owen stared at both. Leave it. Nobody needed convincing. We passed the floating ring without touching it. Half a mile later, the loose rope that had somehow remained connected to the dinghy appeared beside us. Hundreds of feet of line lying on the water, then it ended. No knot, no clip. Just a clean cut. Martin slowed. Do we recover it? 6 people said no at the same time. He kept moving. At exactly 4:06, the chart plotter showed us crossing the coordinates where I had taken the first photograph. The ocean looked completely ordinary. Martin stopped the vessel. Helen said, "Now we turn, slowly, very slowly." The Morrow rotated until our bow pointed east. All 8 of us watched the horizon. It stayed. Martin advanced the throttles. 2 knots, then 4, then 6. The horizon remained intact. Nobody said anything for several minutes. Finally, Owen leaned back and closed his eyes. Never putting me in that dinghy again. Martin said, wasn't planning to. That night we anchored nothing. We stayed underway. Martin refused to stop moving until we were well outside the area. Around midnight, people finally started sleeping in shifts. I couldn't. I sat in the galley going through the photographs, hundreds of frames. Whales, water, the missing horizon, Owen's dinghy, the duplicate life ring. Most looked exactly as I remembered. Then I found one I didn't. It had been taken while we were reversing along the wake. The timestamp placed it about 15 minutes before the western horizon returned. I must have shot it automatically while documenting our progress. The photograph showed our stern. The wake stretched away behind us. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I zoomed in. The wake did not end at the horizon. It reached it, touched it, and continued. Not across the water, upward. A narrow white trail rose from the sea and climbed vertically into the sky. I stared at the image until the screen dimmed, then turned the brightness back up. Same thing. No reflection. No cloud. No lens artifact I had ever seen. Just our wake bending 90 degrees where the world should have ended. I never showed Martin. I never showed Helen. When we returned to port, everyone gave slightly different versions of what happened. Equipment problems, optical effects, stress, navigation confusion. Nobody wanted the event turned into something that would follow their careers. I understood. I kept the photograph, not as proof. Proof is supposed to make something clearer. That picture did the opposite, because for a few hours I thought the ocean had become impossible. Now I think the ocean was behaving normally. We were the part that had stopped moving through it correctly. And sometimes, when I look at that white line climbing into the sky, I wonder how far we actually traveled that afternoon. Not according to GPS, not according to the rope. According to wherever the wake was going. The tow line was never supposed to point straight down. That was the first thing I knew for certain. Not suspected, not guessed, knew. My name is Daniel Rourke. I was 46 when this happened, and by then I had spent 23 years working commercial boats in the Gulf. Supply vessels, anchor handlers, harbor tugs, ocean tugs. Long enough to know there are plenty of things offshore that look strange until you understand the load, the weather, or the water. A towing cable is not one of them. A towing cable tells you exactly what is happening. If the tow drifts starboard, the line leads starboard. If the barge falls behind, the line stretches aft. If the sea puts weight on what you're pulling, you see it in the catenary, hear it in the winch, and feel it in the deck. Steel does not lie because it has no reason to. That was why the first abnormal tension reading bothered me more than anything I could actually see. We were 3 days into a 5-day tow south of Louisiana, moving an unmanned offshore processing module toward a dismantling yard near Brownsville. Calling it a barge was technically wrong, but everyone aboard called it one anyway. It was a rectangular steel platform about 200 feet long, stripped of most useful equipment, with old pipe racks, empty housings, a small crane, and enough rust to make it look older than it was. No crew aboard, no engines, no active systems. Just 20-some thousand tons of dead industrial steel being pulled behind us. Our tug was the Caroline Voss, 128 feet, twin screw, 8 crew. Captain Harold Keene had commanded her for almost 11 years. Keene was the kind of captain who didn't raise his voice because he had spent his entire career making people listen without needing to. I was relief mate, second wheelhouse watch, navigation, deck coordination, paperwork, and whatever else needed doing between midnight and noon. At 4:17 in the morning, the tow tension climbed by 11%. Not dangerous, not even close, just wrong. I was alone in the wheelhouse except for Luis Garza, our AB on watch, who was making coffee badly enough that I could smell it from across the room. I glanced at the towing display, then again. Luis. Yeah? Did we change our PM? He looked toward the engine instruments. No. Current? He checked the environmental panel. 0.7 from southwest. Same as it had been. Sea state was maybe 2 feet. Wind under 10 knots. The Voss was making a steady 5.3 knots. I watched the tension value. It rose another 2%, then held. Luis brought his coffee over. What? I pointed. He frowned. Tow caught current? Not enough. Platform yawing? I looked aft through the dark. We could see the module's navigation lights placed by the towing crew before departure. 3 white points in the black. Steady. No dramatic lateral movement. Radar showed the same. Maybe sensor drift, Luis said. That was reasonable. So I checked the secondary load cell. Same reading, independent circuit, same tension. I opened the winch camera. No slippage, no unusual wrap. No hydraulic fault. Everything agreed. Something had made the tow heavier. The captain came up 20 minutes later. Keene looked at the display, then out the aft windows. How long? 23 minutes. Change in heading? No. Speed? Stable. He took the binoculars, even though there wasn't much to see. The module's lights remained exactly where they should have been. Bring us down 0.3. I reduced speed. Tow tension dropped. Correctly. Keene waited. Bring it back. I returned to our previous setting. Tension climbed, also correctly. That was the problem. A faulty gauge behaves badly. Ours behaved perfectly. It was simply measuring a load that shouldn't have existed. By sunrise, tension had increased another 9%. Chief Engineer Mara Ellis came up with thermal readings from the winch machinery. "All normal," Keene said. "You inspect the drum?" "Twice." "Brake?" "Fine." "Hydraulics?" "Fine." "Tow connection?" Mara looked at me. "Unless you figured out how to inspect 2,000 feet of wire in open water, no." The tow wire itself was a thick steel cable running from our stern winch through the towing gear and down into the sea before rising toward the module behind us. At that distance, part of the line naturally disappeared beneath the surface. That was normal. Keene ordered a slow starboard turn. The idea was simple. If the module had caught some unusual current, changing our relative angle should change the load. We turned 10 degrees. Tension barely moved. 20 degrees. Nothing meaningful. The module followed. 30, still heavy. Keene stared at the gauge. "That's not current," Mara said. "Could have snagged debris." "In 3,000 feet of water?" "Floating gear, net, cable. Enough to add this much?" She didn't answer. By 8 that morning the sun was up and visibility was excellent. I went aft with Luis and Mara to inspect what we could physically inspect. The wire left the stern under heavy but stable load. No vibration, no visible damage, no unusual sound. It entered the gulf behind us in a long diagonal line. Exactly as expected. Luis leaned over the rail. "Looks normal." I almost agreed. Then the tug rose gently on a swell. For maybe 2 seconds, the angle changed enough for sunlight to penetrate deeper along the wire. And I saw another cable. I grabbed the rail. "Wait!" Mara looked at me. "What?" The swell passed. The view disappeared. I moved to the starboard side. Another swell lifted us. There. The towing wire went aft toward the module, but beneath the surface, another section of the same steel line continued almost vertically downward, straight beneath the Voss. I could see the junction. There was no knot, no branch fitting, no second cable attached. One line left our stern, and somehow underwater it traveled in 2 directions. Mara saw it on the next swell. Her face changed. Luis said, "That's not possible." Nobody answered. We watched again. The aft section pulled toward the platform. The downward section disappeared into blue-black water directly beneath us. Both were tight, both were carrying load, and both were the same continuous piece of steel. My radio crackled. Keene's voice came from the wheelhouse. "Daniel, tension just climbed another 5%. I was still looking into the water. "Captain." "Go." "I think I know where the extra load is coming from." A pause. "Where?" I watched the second line descend until sunlight could no longer follow it. "Straight down." Keene came down to see it himself. He didn't believe me over the radio. I could tell from the way he said, "Hold position. I'm coming aft." That wasn't disbelief exactly, more like a refusal to let an impossible sentence become real until he had looked at it with his own eyes. He joined us at the stern wearing no hat, which I remember because Keene wore a cap almost constantly offshore, even indoors. Mara pointed down. "Wait for the swell." We did. The stern lifted. Sunlight punched deeper into the water. The wire separated into 2 directions. One line leading aft toward the module, one descending nearly vertical. Keene stared at it until the stern dropped again. Then he said, "Again." The next swell came. Same thing. Luis said, "There's no hardware there." Keene leaned over the rail. "There can't be." Mara said, "I know." "No, I mean physically. You can't split a continuous wire under load without a fitting." "I know," Keene straightened. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like a man who wanted somebody else to make the decision. Then the winch alarm sounded. Not an emergency alarm, a high-load advisory. We all turned toward the towing display mounted near the deck controls. Tension had climbed another 7%. Keen swore once. "Bring us down." I relayed the order. Engine RPM dropped. Our speed fell. The aft section of tow wire relaxed slightly. The vertical section did not. That was the first clue that mattered. Mara saw it too. "Captain." "I see it." The cable going to the platform eased with reduced propulsion. The cable going down stayed tight as a rod. Keen ordered another reduction, then another. At 3 knots, our normal towing load should have fallen significantly. The aft leg did. The downward leg stayed hard. Luis said, "Whatever's below us isn't being towed." Keen looked at him. "What?" "It's fixed." The words sat there. Mara moved towards the winch controls. "If that endpoint is fixed, then every foot we move forward increases load on that leg." I said, "Which means we're pulling against it." "Or wrapping around it." Keen looked aft toward the module. The idea was ugly, but it fit. If you imagine towing a heavy object past a piling and your line somehow catches around that piling, you stop pulling the object directly behind you. You start pulling both yourself and the object toward the obstruction. Except there was no piling, no buoy, no tower, no seabed structure, nothing on charts, and we were in water far too deep for anything fixed below us to make sense. Keen said, "Mark position." I gave him the coordinates. He repeated them aloud. Mara wrote them on the deck board. No one commented on how ordinary that action felt. Keen pointed toward the wheelhouse. 10-degree port circle, minimum headway. We see if the downward leg tracks us. Back upstairs, I took the helm while Keen watched the load display. We started a slow port turn. The module followed wide behind us. Tension fluctuated. Normal. Then the downward leg came into view on the stern camera. It didn't stay beneath the tug. It angled, not toward our new heading, toward the same point in the ocean we had marked. I said, "Captain." "I see it." We continued the turn. 20 degrees, 40, 90. The Voss made a broad circle. The towing wire should have shifted continuously behind us. Instead, the underwater branch kept reorienting toward one fixed patch of sea. By the time we had turned half a circle, the geometry was undeniable. Whatever endpoint existed below the water had not moved. We had. Keen whispered, "We're hooked." Mara stood beside the load display. "Not hooked." Keen looked at her. "Then what would you call it?" She pointed at the downward line. "If we were hooked, I'd expect abrasion, vibration, changing angle over a physical contact point." "So?" "There isn't one." The downward section did not bend around anything. It simply existed from a point on our tow wire straight into the deep. No chafe, no oscillation, no contact, just another direction. Keen said, "Call the office." I looked at him. "What do you want me to report?" He rubbed his jaw. "High tow load, possible submerged obstruction." That was the closest sentence available. I made the call. Operations wanted numbers, load percentage, position. Weather, tow behavior. They suggested we inspect for fishing gear. Mara closed her eyes while I listened. I said we had no visible net or debris. They asked whether we could deploy an ROV. We didn't carry one. They suggested reducing speed and monitoring. Keen took the handset from me. "We are monitoring." He listened. "No, I'm not comfortable continuing." Another pause. His expression hardened. "I understand the contract." That told me what the office had said. The dismantling tow was expensive. Weather routing had already cost the contractor a day. Abandoning the module offshore would trigger insurance claims, investigation, salvage costs, and enough paperwork to consume careers. Keen listened another 30 seconds, then hung up. Mara asked, "Well?" "They want us to continue at reduced speed unless load reaches release threshold." Luis laughed from the aft console. "That's comforting. Keen didn't respond. He looked at the tension gauge, then at me. 3 knots. Hold heading. We resumed. For the next hour, the load rose slowly. Not because of weather, not because the module was drifting, because every mile we moved increased the downward component. The stern began settling lower. At first, only enough for Mara to notice, then enough for all of us. The aft deck took spray on swells that should never have reached it. Keen ordered another speed reduction. The platform behind us started yawing. Slowly, 5 degrees, then 10. Its navigation lights shifted sideways on radar. I said, "She's swinging." Keen nodded. "Counter it." I adjusted heading. The module did not straighten. Instead, it continued rotating, not toward our wake, toward the marked point. Mara brought up the plot. She drew our position, the module's position, the fixed underwater point, then connected them. The 3 formed a triangle. As the module rotated, the triangle tightened. Luis said, "It's circling it." Nobody corrected him, because that was exactly what it was doing. The Voss was beginning the same arc, very slowly. Our heading remained south. Our track did not. GPS showed us sliding east. Keen increased port rudder. The tug answered mechanically. The track barely changed. What the hell? I looked aft. The module had rotated nearly 30 degrees around the invisible center. We were no longer towing it in a straight line. Both vessels were being pulled sideways. Mara stared at the plot. "We're not wrapped around it." Keen said, "What?" She traced the motion with her finger. If the line were wrapped, the geometry would tighten from one direction. She looked at us. "We're orbiting." That word landed harder than anything else she could have said. Keen immediately ordered engines back. The Voss slowed. The sideways motion continued. Not as fast, but it continued. The module drifted around the unseen center. So did we. Luis said very quietly, "Captain, how far are we from release threshold?" Mara answered before Keen could. 11%. The deck tilted slightly beneath us, not from a swell, from load. Keen stared at the numbers, then at the towing release control. A protected red switch under a clear cover. Emergency tow release. 1 pull. Hydraulic jaws open. Wire pays out. Tow gone. Years of seamanship, money, liability, and professional pride sat on the other side of that switch. Keen looked at me. "Not yet." I didn't argue, not then. But when I looked through the aft window, I saw the module turn another few degrees toward the invisible center. And for the first time, I understood that we were not deciding whether to save the tow. We were deciding how long we were willing to let it take us with it. The release threshold was supposed to protect the vessel. That was the logic behind it. If tow tension reached a point where the wire, winch, or vessel itself was at risk, we were supposed to let the tow go before steel started deciding things for us. In training, that decision sounded simple. Numbers rise, alarm sounds. Captain orders release. You lose equipment instead of people. Offshore, very little is that clean. Keen kept the Voss at minimum useful power and watched the load climb. 9% below threshold. 8. Then it stopped. For almost 10 minutes the number held. That was enough for everyone to start hoping. Luis said, "Maybe we found equilibrium." Mara didn't answer, neither did I. The module remained behind us, offset now by nearly 40 degrees from our original tow line. Our GPS track showed a slow curved drift around the fixed point. But the curvature had also slowed. Keen reduced rudder. Nothing dramatic happened. For 5 minutes the gulf looked ordinary again. Then Mara said, "Stern draft." I checked the aft camera. Water was higher against the hull, not by much, maybe another foot. Keen said, "Load hasn't changed." "That's the problem." Mara pulled up the ballast monitor. "No ballast transfer, no flooding alarms." Luis looked toward the deck. "We're sitting lower without additional tow load?" Mara nodded. I understood what that meant a second later. The force was changing direction. Not increasing, turning downward. Keene saw it too. He said, "Engine room, check shaft loading." The engineer on duty answered, "Normal." "Bilges?" "Dry." "Steering gear?" "Normal." Everything on board was functioning. The Voss itself was simply being pulled deeper. Keene looked at the emergency release, then away. "Daniel, plot distance to the marked point." I did. The number surprised me. 0.8 nautical. Luis said, "That close?" We had been much farther when this started, not because we drove toward it, because the circle had tightened. The module was closer too. All three positions, tug, platform, invisible center, were collapsing inward. Mara leaned over the chart. "At this rate, we're going to make another full quarter rotation in under an hour." Keene said, "We won't." He increased power. The engines responded immediately. Propeller wash widened behind us. The bow turned away from the fixed point. For several seconds, the GPS track improved. Then the tow line groaned. The sound came through the hull, low, deep. Everyone in the wheelhouse stopped moving. Tow tension climbed 5% in less than 10 seconds. High load alarm. Keene reduced throttle. Too late. The stern dropped. Water came across the aft deck. Not a wave. A sheet. Luis grabbed the console. "Captain." "I see it." The load dropped 2%, then climbed again. Mara said, "We're past where propulsion helps." Keene snapped, "I know." It was the first time I heard anger in his voice, not at her, at the situation. He moved to the release console, lifted the clear cover. His hand rested on the red switch. Then he stopped. The office call earlier had done more damage than I realized. I could see the calculation on his face. The tow was insured. The vessel was insured. Nobody was telling him to risk lives. But if he released now, before the automatic threshold, every later question would begin with the same sentence. "Why did you abandon the tow?" And every answer we had sounded insane. Invisible endpoint. Second direction in the wire, orbiting empty water. Keene lowered the cover. 5%? Mara stared at him. "What?" "We wait until 5% below threshold. Then we release." Luis said, "Why 5? "Because that is my decision." Nobody argued after that. I wish I had. 3 minutes later, something changed behind us. The module stopped rotating. Completely. Our tug continued drifting around the fixed point. The module held still. Luis noticed first. Platform stopped. Keene looked at radar. He frowned. "What's holding it?" Then the tow line lifted out of the water. Not all of it, just the section between us and the module. A long stretch of steel cable rose until it was visible above the surface. Water poured from it. It should have sagged. Instead, it tightened almost straight. Mara whispered, "Oh no." The downward section beneath us had taken more load, enough that the normal tow leg was being pulled upward. The geometry was no longer a triangle. Something below had become the dominant endpoint. The towing display jumped, 3% below release threshold. Alarm changed tone. Keene reached for the red switch. The module moved. Not sideways, down, maybe 6 feet, perfectly level. Its navigation lights dropped closer to the water. Luis said, "That wasn't a swell?" No, it descended again. Another 6 feet, still level, no list, no flooding, no bow-first sinking. It looked like an elevator lowering a building. Keene stared at it, then pushed the release cover up. The radio crackled. Operations, perfect timing. "Caroline Voss, status update requested." Keene ignored it. The load climbed, 2% below threshold. Operations called again. "Caroline Voss, confirm tow integrity." Keene's hand hovered over the switch. I looked at the module. It descended another 10 feet. Deck structures that had been well above the water were now nearly level with the surface. Mara said, "Captain." Keen still hesitated. 1%. The stern of the Voss settled lower. Water swept across the towing deck. Luis shouted from aft, "We're taking green water." Keen grabbed the switch. Then the load dropped. Suddenly, 5%, 10, 15. The alarm silenced. Everyone froze. The module stopped descending. Keen looked at the gauge. Mara said, "Why did it release load?" Nobody knew. Then I saw the module. The old processing platform behind us was still there, but the tow line no longer ran directly to it. The steel cable led from our stern toward the water, disappeared, and surfaced again near the module from a different angle, as though a huge invisible hand beneath the gulf had pulled a loop downward. Luis stared at it. It took slack. Mara shook her head. "No." She pointed at the plot. The module's position had changed, not much, but enough. It was closer to the fixed center, so were we. The lower load wasn't relief. It had shortened the system. Keen looked at the red switch. I said, "Release it." He didn't respond. "Captain." "I heard you. We're not waiting for the number anymore." He looked at me. That was crossing a line on a vessel. A relief mate does not casually tell a captain what decision to make. I knew it. He knew it. "Daniel, the gauge is still accurate." His jaw tightened. "That's exactly why I'm saying it." Mara looked between us. I continued, "The threshold assumes the load gets dangerous before the vessel does. That is not what's happening." Keen said nothing. "The force is changing direction. It can lower without becoming safer." He looked aft again. The platform descended another few feet, not enough to trigger an alarm, enough to prove the point. Mara said quietly, "He's right." Keen closed his eyes for maybe 1 second, then opened them. "Emergency release stations." Luis moved aft. Mara went to the backup hydraulic controls. I stayed beside Keen. He picked up the PA microphone. "All crew, brace for tow release. All crew, brace for tow release." The vessel suddenly swung starboard, hard. The fixed point had tightened the orbit again. Keen grabbed the console. "Now!" Mara triggered hydraulic pressure. Nothing. She looked at the panel. "Release pressure falling." Keen said, "Again." She tried. No response. Luis came over radio from the stern. "Primary jaws aren't opening." The tow line hummed through the deck. Keen looked at me. The decision had finally been made. And now the machinery was refusing to carry it out. "Manual release," I said. He nodded. Manual release meant going onto the towing deck, into the place where a steel wire under impossible load was trying to decide which direction the ship belonged. Luis was already on the towing deck when I came through the aft door. He had clipped himself to the safety rail and was crouched beside the release assembly, one hand on the manual lever housing. The tow wire ran past him under enough load that I could feel its vibration through the soles of my boots. You do not stand near a tension towing wire unless you have to. If it parts, it does not simply fall. It moves. Fast enough to cut through steel fittings, rails, people. Every tug crew knows the snapback zones. Every tug crew respects them. That morning the problem was that the entire stern had effectively become one. Mara's voice came through my radio. "Manual hydraulic bypass should be live." Luis looked at the gauge beside the release cylinder. "It's not." "How much pressure?" "Barely anything." Keen came over the channel. "Can you open mechanically?" Luis looked at me. The emergency system had a secondary manual arrangement intended for a complete hydraulic failure. Not elegant, not fast. A steel locking pin had to be unloaded and pulled. Under normal conditions, you could reduce tow tension enough to do it safely. Normal conditions had stopped applying hours ago. I crouched beside him. The module behind us was lower now. More than half of its main deck had disappeared beneath the surface, still level, still upright. No dramatic flooding, no visible structural failure. It just kept going down. Luis said, "Pins loaded." "I know. If I hit it with a hammer, you deform it, we lose the manual option." "So what do you want?" I looked at the wire. The downward leg beneath us remained tight. The aft leg leading toward the platform had just enough change in angle to give me an idea. "Captain, can you put stern toward the fixed point?" Keen answered immediately. "We're already being pulled around it." "Use it. Don't fight the orbit. Steer into it." There was a pause. Mara said, "Daniel? If we align the vessel with the downward component, we might take side load off the release jaw long enough to pull the pin." Keen understood. "That also points the stern toward whatever is pulling us." "Yes." Another pause. Then, "Hold on." The rudders shifted. I felt the tug begin to turn, not against the movement this time. With it. The Voss swung starboard. The module disappeared from my direct line of sight as our stern aligned toward the marked empty patch of gulf. The towing wire changed angle. Luis stared at the manual release gauge. "Come on." The vessel rotated another few degrees. The wire stopped grinding against the lateral guide. Mara called from inside. "Load distribution changing." Luis grabbed the locking pin. It didn't move. "Still stuck." "Wait." Keen adjusted again. The stern pointed almost directly at the invisible center. The strangest part was how ordinary the water looked. Blue gulf, small swell, sunlight, nothing marking the place that was trying to drag tens of thousands of tons downward. Luis pulled again. The pin shifted, half an inch. His eyes widened. "Got it." I clipped a retrieval line to the pin handle. Together. We pulled. The pin moved another inch, then stopped. The tow wire suddenly tightened. The deck jerked under us. Luis fell against the rail. I caught myself on the release housing. The pin slammed halfway back into place. "Damn it!" Keen's voice came over the radio. Module moved. I looked aft. The platform had descended again. Only the upper pipe rack, crane boom, and a few high structures remained above water. But now it was closer, much closer. It had traveled toward us while descending, not in a straight line, around the invisible point. The orbit was tightening fast. Mara said, "Distance to center point 4 nautical." Luis stared at me. "We're almost on top of it." I grabbed the pin. Again. Keen adjusted heading. This time I watched the towing wire instead of the gauge. It relaxed laterally. Just a fraction. "Now," Luis and I pulled. The pin came free. He nearly fell backward with it. For half a second, nothing happened. The manual release jaw remained shut. Luis looked at me. "That should have opened." Then I remembered the secondary latch, a mechanical dog designed to prevent accidental release if the pin was removed under load. I pointed. "That." Luis saw it. The dog was buried beneath the edge of the housing. To reach it, one of us had to move closer to the wire, inside the worst part of the snapback zone. Luis started forward. I grabbed his harness. "No!" He looked at me. "You know the assembly better?" "No." "Then I'm the mate." "That doesn't make you bulletproof." "No, it makes it my call." He stared at me for a second, then backed off. I clipped my short lanyard to the inner rail. The wire hummed beside me, not a high metallic vibration anymore. A deep tone, almost too low to hear. I moved toward the latch. Every instinct I had told me not to put any part of my body near that cable. I crouched, reached, couldn't get enough leverage. The dog had loaded against the jaw. Mara said over the radio, "Daniel, tension rising again." "How much?" "Fast." I pulled harder. Nothing. Luis shouted, "Use the bar." He slid a short steel pry bar across the deck. I caught it, inserted the tip beneath the latch, pressed down. The dog moved maybe a quarter inch. The towing wire gave a violent twitch. I froze. Something changed in the water beside the stern. At first I thought it was prop wash. Then I realized the surface was forming a depression, not a whirlpool. There was no rotation. The ocean directly beneath the downward cable was lowering, a broad circular bowl perhaps 50 feet across. Water sloped inward toward a center that remained dark and perfectly smooth. Louise stared over the rail. "What is that?" I didn't answer. The tow line descended into the middle of it. The depression deepened, 3 feet, 5, 8. The tug's stern began sliding toward it. Keene shouted, "Daniel, release now!" I drove my weight onto the pry bar. The latch snapped open. For a fraction of a second, the entire release assembly seemed to hesitate. Then the towing jaw opened. The sound was enormous, not an explosion. A deep steel bang that traveled through the vessel. The wire launched backward. Louise and I hit the deck. Thousands of pounds of tension disappeared from the stern in an instant. The cable raced through the release guide. Water exploded upward where it entered the sea. The Voss surged forward as if someone had cut an anchor chain. Keene immediately increased power. "Clear the stern! Clear the stern!" Louise dragged me by the harness. We crawled behind the protective bulkhead. The tow wire continued paying out, hundreds of feet, then more. It should have followed the module. Instead, most of it went straight into the dark depression beneath the sea. The module rotated once, slowly, almost one complete turn around the invisible center. Then it began descending. The remaining deck disappeared. The crane boom lowered. Pipe racks vanished. The highest structure was a rusted vent stack maybe 40 feet above the platform deck. I watched it until only 10 feet remained above water. Then 5. Then nothing. No violent sinking. No bubbles, no roll, no breakup. The entire platform simply traveled downward while staying perfectly level. The tow wire followed. Then the last section of steel cable vanished into the sea. The depression collapsed. One wave crossed the empty water, then another. Within seconds, there was nothing there. Just gulf. The Voss kept moving. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then Keene said over the radio very quietly, "Mark the position." I looked toward the wheelhouse. Even after everything we had seen, that was still his first instinct. Mark the position. Make the loss into something that could be reported. I checked the GPS, then stopped. "Captain." "What?" I looked again. The coordinates of the fixed point were gone from our plotted track. Not deleted, not corrupted. Our entire path curved smoothly past the area as though we had never circled anything at all. According to the navigation system, we had spent the last several hours towing south in a slightly irregular line. Nothing more. Keene came down to the deck 10 minutes later. Nobody mentioned the plot. He stood at the stern, staring at the empty sea. Then he looked at me. "You released before my final order." I did. He nodded once. "You were right." That should have felt like relief. It didn't, because the module was gone, and somewhere beneath us, several thousand feet of steel towing cable had followed it into a place that, according to every chart on board, had never existed. We returned to port without the tow. That sounds obvious, but if you have never worked commercial marine operations, you might not understand what that means. A tug arriving empty when it was contracted to deliver 20,000 tons of somebody else's property does not quietly tie up and send the crew home. People were waiting for us, company representatives, insurance people, a marine surveyor, 2 men from the platform owner. By the afternoon, everyone aboard the Caroline Voss had been separated and interviewed. The questions were reasonable. When did abnormal tension begin? What was the weather? What was the condition of the towing gear? Why had Captain Keene continued after noticing an unexplained load? Why had I manually released the tow? Could the module have flooded? Had anyone visually confirmed progressive loss of freeboard? Was there any possibility the platform had capsized outside our field of view? That last one almost made Luis laugh. Almost. We had watched the thing descend level. But try writing that on an incident form. Mara explained the load behavior without mentioning impossible geometry. She said the wire developed an unexplained downward component. The surveyor asked what could cause that. She said she didn't know. He asked whether the line could have snagged submerged infrastructure. She reminded him of the water depth. He asked about abandoned drilling equipment. She asked him to show her one on the chart. That conversation ended there. Keene took responsibility for delaying release. I took responsibility for performing it. Nobody accused us of inventing anything. That would almost have been easier. Instead, they treated our statements like the unreliable edges around a more ordinary accident that had not yet been discovered. Equipment failure, structural flooding, tow instability, sensor misinterpretation, human stress. The boring explanations were not unreasonable. That was what bothered me. Because if you had not been there, they were better explanations than ours. The company recovered the released section remaining aboard. The emergency jaws were inspected. They worked correctly. The manual pin was damaged where Luis and I had fought it, but not enough to explain the original hydraulic failure. The tow wire had no abnormal wear near the release point. No evidence of sudden impact. No sign that it had wrapped around anything. Mara showed me the report. One sentence stayed with me. Failure mechanism indeterminate due to loss of tow assembly. Loss of tow assembly. 1,000 impossible things compressed into 4 safe words. Keene was suspended pending review. I was removed from vessel duty. Luis transferred to harbor work before anyone could make a decision about him. Mara stayed with the Voss during repairs. For 6 weeks, nobody found the platform. Search aircraft flew the predicted drift area. Coast Guard notices went out. Commercial traffic was warned. Nothing. A structure that large cannot simply vanish in the Gulf. People said that repeatedly. I stopped arguing with the sentence. Then, 43 days after we lost it, the module came back. Not to us. A tanker crew spotted it roughly 370 miles east of our release position, floating upright. No tug attached, no distress beacon active. No meaningful damage beyond what you would expect from an unmanned industrial structure left at sea. When Keene called me, I thought he was joking. They found it. Where? He told me. I sat down at my kitchen table. That current doesn't work. I know. It couldn't drift that far east in 43 days from our position. I know. Was it flooded? No, I stopped. How much freeboard? Normal. That was impossible. We had watched nearly the entire structure disappear beneath the Gulf. Keene continued. They're towing it in. With what? A salvage tug. And it's behaving? So far. I drove down 2 days later. Officially, I had no reason to be anywhere near the salvage inspection. Unofficially, Mara knew one of the surveyors and got me onto the dock. The platform looked exactly the way I remembered it before the incident. Same rusted crane, same stripped pipe racks, same rectangular bulk. Standing there in daylight, tied safely alongside, it looked almost embarrassing. Like the 8 of us had somehow been defeated by an oversized piece of scrap metal. Mara met me near the stern quarter. You need to see something. We boarded with the inspection team. I expected signs of submersion, salt deposits high on equipment, water trapped where it shouldn't be, marine growth, anything. There was nothing convincing. One engineer said several housings showed moisture intrusion, but the module had already been exposed to weather for years. No evidence proved it had gone underwater. Then we reached the towing connection. Our wire was still attached. I stared at it. The same heavy steel cable we had watched vanish into that depression. Same hardware, same connection. It ran from the platform into the water. A dive team had already inspected it. Mara handed me a preliminary sheet. Read the length. I did. 61 feet. I looked at her. What? That's all that's there. The diver had followed the cable down. At approximately 61 feet below the surface, it ended. Cleanly, I said. Broken? Mara shook her head. Cut. By what? No idea. I looked back at the wire. Thousands of feet had left the Voss. I had watched it race through the release assembly until the last visible section disappeared. Even if my sense of length had been distorted in the moment, the winch records confirmed how much wire left the vessel. There should have been more than a mile of steel attached to that platform. There were 61 feet. I asked, "Where's the rest?" Mara gave me the same look she had given the load display that morning. The look people make when they know the question is correct and useless. The official report eventually blamed a complex combination of tow instability, probable flooding, abnormal current interaction, and emergency equipment complications. The missing wire was attributed to post-release mechanical failure. Captain Keene kept his license but never returned to the Voss. Luis left offshore work entirely. Mara stayed. I didn't. Technically, nobody fired me. There were meetings, reviews, a recommendation that I undergo additional emergency command evaluation before returning as relief mate, then fewer calls, then none. I understood. In the official version, I was the officer who manually abandoned a valuable tow before the automatic release threshold had been reached. I could live with that. Losing the job bothered me less than I expected. What bothered me was what happened 6 months later. The platform was finally dismantled. Mara sent me one photograph from the yard, just a phone picture. The towing cable had been removed and laid out on concrete for documentation. 61 feet of steel wire. Clean severance at one end, normal connection hardware at the other. Beside it, somebody had placed a measuring tape. I stared at that photograph for maybe 10 minutes. Then I noticed something near the cut end. A dark band. I zoomed in. There was marine growth on the last few inches of cable. Not much, a thin crust of pale material. Mara told me the lab identified it as deep-water cold-seep organisms, the sort normally associated with environments far below recreational or commercial diving depth. Nobody could explain how organisms from deep Gulf habitat ended up on a wire that supposedly terminated 61 feet beneath the surface. I asked her whether the growth could have attached somewhere else and survived. She said maybe. Scientists can usually give you a maybe if you need one badly enough. I still work around boats, smaller ones now. Harbor jobs, short runs, places where I can see both ends of most problems. Every once in a while, I'll watch a tug leaving port with a tow behind it. The wire enters the water, disappears for a while, comes back up where it should. People see that and think the ocean is hiding the middle. I don't. I think the middle is usually exactly where we believe it is, usually. What I still cannot explain is why the platform came back. Whatever happened beneath us had enough force to pull a tug and 20,000 tons of steel out of their normal path. It took thousands of feet of towing cable. It lowered the platform until there was nothing left above the surface. Then, 43 days later, the platform was floating again hundreds of miles away, upright, intact, with 61 feet of our cable still attached. For years, I thought the frightening part was that something beneath the Gulf had taken our tow. It isn't. The frightening part is that after taking it somewhere we could not follow, something cut the line and gave it back.